Well, welcome back into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. Jeremy Warner and Ryan Easterling. So we are going to focus on Illinois football recruiting today on the podcast, and what a month it has been for Illinois football recruiting. I think I did some of the math, 32 official visits on campus, 12 different mega camps that they have been to out of the state, 3 on-campus camps as well. Ryan, usually they're busy months in the recruiting calendar every year, but after 15 months of no in-person recruiting, this is one of the most wild months I've ever seen, because like there feels like there were some years there weren't even 32 official visitors like during an entire year. Illinois did all of that in 4 weekends. It was pretty insane. And we'll break down everything about it, but what were your big 30,000 foot view kind of takeaways from this month that had been so anticipated, and Illinois was really aggressive with it?
Yeah, and there's 2 things that really stand out to me. The first was that Illinois was really the first program to go out there and just aggressively schedule these. They anticipated the opening of the dead period going away and being able to host visitors, and they jumped out in front of it several months ago. They planned a packed month. I thought it was really important, especially with the new staff, to get as many guys on campus as they did, just because they haven't had a chance to really interact with these guys outside of Zoom or phone calls, text messages, DMs, all that stuff. So getting guys on campus as much as they could to meet and interact with the new staff, which really seems to be like one of the big things that's working well for them. But also with the volume of visitors that they had, they really executed it well. Everything we've heard, obviously guys come away from visits and they feel like they had a great time. It's the coach's job to put on a good show, but it feels like they've really had a plan. They executed it. They put together well thought out weekends that were very intentional. They gave the guys time to build relationships with the assistant coaches, with Bielema, and with the players. So I thought just the program that they put together as far as how they carried out these official visits really was one of the positives for them. And it seems like it's made an impact for the number of guys.
Yeah, now the downside of this is they only have 2 commitments this month, which is the lowest among Big Ten West teams, but they came in with the most, right? So they came in with 8 commitments in the class, and all of them took their official visits this month. So that's a big chunk, a quarter of the official visits they had. But I thought that was well planned to get them around a lot of their top targets. And I think having those 8 on board already, Ryan, did allow them to be more aggressive than some of their peers. Like Illinois in the Big Ten was the highest in the West by more than 10 official visitors. They were up there with Ohio State and Penn State, each had 42 official visitors this month. Michigan and Indiana at 33, Illinois at 32. That's not bad company to be in, right? Some of these other Big Ten West programs weren't as aggressive, but I think Illinois was able to do that because they had such a foundation in their class. So they could use the 48 other official visits in their disposal. They get 56 per class. They could use it to really focus on filling those final, 10, 12 spots probably in this class. And, they only got 2 so far, but they seem like they've made a headway with a lot of their top targets, and that they should probably close on, I'd say, a couple at the very least in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I'm not too alarmed with the lack of commitments, because the other flip side of it is a lot of these guys haven't been able to get out to campuses. A few guys took self-guided tours, but most of these guys wanted to take several official visits and go see all the different schools that have been recruiting them. You've got your couple of guys that jumped on board that Illinois really targeted and went after and have been going after for a while. But there are a lot of these other guys that have options. And, that's one of the things is they're recruiting guys that have options. And so they're going out, they're doing their due diligence. And, after not being able to see schools in person for well over a year, who could blame them? So I don't think it's anything to be too alarmed at. I do think that it is important to not underestimate the importance of having all those guys coming back on campus that are already committed, because not only are the coaches and the players doing the recruiting, but I think one thing that's been really prevalent in this first class so far is how many of the other commits are actively involved in the recruiting process. And especially when you have guys that are in-state commits. So if you look at, Jordan Anderson, you look at Malachi Hood, guys like that have been actively involved in coming down to campus and joining some of the other uncommitted players there, and they're really kind of building it together. And when you have more out of state commits, that's harder to do because those guys just can't pick up on a Saturday morning, drive down and go hang out with the other recruits. So I think that's one thing that moving forward you'll probably see be a more prevalent thing. um, and we've talked about this before, but they, coming into June, July in past years, they might have had one or two commits. This year, you've got 8 or 9 coming into the month of June, and you finish June with 10. Your class is half done. Now you can get more focused, more targeted with the remaining guys. I think there's a few guys in the next 4 to 5 weeks who are making decisions. So, this class could potentially grow in the next few weeks. And then when the season comes in the fall, you're really just looking to fill about 4 or 5 more spots. And you can be more selective with those guys at the time, and also wait and see if anything shakes out with some guys that are maybe a late bloomer, that have a good senior season, or a guy that pops out of nowhere that you didn't know about before.
I do think aggressive is a term for this staff, though, especially with some of the guys that they offered and took before June. They were very confident in their evaluations of Jordan Anderson, of Henry Boyer, Clayton Leonard, as well, Malachi Hood, especially. And I would say, especially Anderson, Boyer, and Hood, I feel like they're a little fortunate with how the COVID calendar actually worked out for them, that they were able to see these guys in person, offer them, get feedback on them, and kind of recruit them and close the recruitment before these guys had a chance to go to some camps. So I just wanted to sneak that in. Like, Jordan Anderson is a top 20 prospect according to the composite rankings in the state. Boyer's at 21, Malachi Hood at 27. So those are solid gets early that, in another world, Ryan, those guys might have had some Power 5 offers if they were able to camp last summer, or they were able, to kind of play out a normal spring of evaluation where schools can kind of come in and see them. I think especially Anderson and Boyer. I think those are guys that could have really intrigued some schools, even if the position isn't certain. The upside of both those guys, given their size and given their athleticism, would have really intrigued people.
Yeah, and the other thing about Jordan Anderson is he played a 6-game season this spring. So on top of not getting opportunities to go to camps and things like that, and I think Illinois did a really good job of getting him committed before they had a chance to go to camps this summer. But think about, the production he had, he was probably on kind of a pitch count, because one thing a lot of the IHSA coaches did was, without playoffs this year, I mean, obviously they still want to play to win the game. A little Dennis Erickson reference there, but without the traditional playoffs, coaches are really just trying to get guys as many reps as they can, top to bottom, to get them exposure, to get them experience. So Anderson probably could have put up even crazier stats than he did in the 6 games he did play. And then if you consider the fact that they were poised for a deep playoff run, he could have been a 2,000+ yard rusher, which at that level is incredible. And Joliet Catholic's put out some good backs. And so, that's just one example, but several of these guys, had they been in a standard season and gotten the visibility that they normally would have gotten under different circumstances, could have very well blown up. So for Illinois to just go in, be confident in those, and whether it's, you call it aggressive, proactive, either way, I think they took that action. They weren't too lax with it all, with the process, and they went out and closed out. And
Yeah, I mean, going forward, usually, as you know, Ryan, it takes years to figure out if evaluations work out. Some will, some will not. But I understand, especially those two, Anderson and Boyer, make a lot of sense for them. All right, moving forward, we haven't had the chance yet. We weren't able to link up last week because we're both busy. Ian Pugh is the highest ranked commitment in this class, a big in-state win for Illinois. They flip the once Cincinnati pledge. He'd been committed to Cincinnati for more than half a year. Iowa was very interested in him, bringing him on an official visit along with Jacob Bostic. They wanted one of those two guys. So that's a really good in-state win for Illinois. Is Pugh a guy that's going to make an immediate impact? Probably not, and I don't think they're counting on that. But this is a big win, not only for what he could mean for Jared Beatty and some of these other in-state recruitments, but it feels like this is a player with a high upside at a huge position of need. And Ryan, you'd seen him play this year. So what do you think of Ian Pugh in that wide receiver room?
Well, I think one of the things, as you said, you can't expect him to make an immediate impact. And that's not to say that he won't see the field early, But one thing I think is important to remember with him is he put on like 15 or 20 pounds in the last year alone. So like when COVID was going on, he was in the weight room and he added a lot of weight. He used to be really, really skinny. But with his frame, I think he's still got room for another 15 or 20 pounds of good muscle. So if he gets up to that point where he's about 6'4", 195, 200 pounds, he's a really good athlete. He's really fluid, great stride, really reliable hands. So once he gets more physical and has that weight to where he can battle off defensive backs and hedge off his position when he's going up to make the catch, I think he's going to be a matchup problem. He's a really refined route runner, got good feet, but also just a good guy, a good program guy, a good culture guy. And with all the effort that the staff put in and the pursuit that they've been going after him for so long, it's a win that you really feel validated for all the effort you put in if you're Bielema and company, because to lose that one to Iowa would have really stung. You've seen a lot of these Catholic League guys that end up going to either Iowa, Notre Dame, Northwestern, etc. You go in there, you target a guy, and you close the deal. I think they've got to feel pretty good about that. And it just continues to build the momentum of in-state recruiting that they have going on right now. And some of the connections he has are probably only going to help even more with a guy like a Jared Beatty or some of these other in-state prospects that they're still trying to close out with.
Yeah, Ryan. And when we come back, I want to talk about some of those other guys that they are in on, some of the guys that we think are pretty close to decisions and where Illinois stands with them. We'll do that when we come back in the Illini Inquirer podcast. Ryan, you mentioned battles with Iowa. Man, there are a lot of them that Illinois has, and that's not a bad school to be in battles for players with. And, I've always said that's a great model for Illinois to look up to. I know a lot of people said Wisconsin, and, Brett Bielema has, obviously ties to both those programs, and that'd be a great model for them to follow. So there's a couple more that Illinois will be going after with Iowa, and wide receiver is a position that now has a scarcity. And Jacob Bostic has been one of the Illini's top targets. And even though they landed Ian Pugh, they'd love to land Jacob Bostic as well. But it'll be interesting to see if those two want to go to the same school. They're very similar wide receivers, very similarly ranked on all the recruiting services. And Bostic just took a visit to Iowa. He just took a visit to Cincinnati. And I think Cincinnati is kind of a under the radar school that's got a chance there because they've made him such a priority. They've, resonated with him in a young recruiting staff, and they have a really good offense that's put up a lot of numbers in the passing game. So Iowa's obviously a big threat there. I thought Illinois had a really good chance, but the more chatter you hear, the more you question whether Pugh and Bostic will play at the same spot. But they also have Sean Miller making a decision soon. You know him well, IMG Academy. They just offered, and I want to get into this with you a little bit later, Ashton Hollins, a sleeper out of Mississippi, and Chaz Nimrod, a kid out of Arkansas. So, all of those players I like. I know there's probably a lot more interest right now in the in-state kid and Jacob Bostic, and I know Illinois would really, really like him, but they have good options, it feels like, at that wide receiver position, whether Bostic picks them, whether Miller picks them or not.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you have to come away with at least one of them. And if you can get two that you really like, then by all means do it. Because you saw where they ended up with at the receiver position at the end of this last season. It was just the cupboard was bare. And that was a position where they had some depth coming into the year, but between injuries and just some different circumstances, it didn't work out that way. So, I think as you're looking to move forward, you want to restock that position. Not only just pass catchers, but you're going to need guys that can block well. I think even though I think they will establish a solid passing game eventually, this team is more than likely going to be run first. We'll see what happens when they get out on the field this fall, but history would suggest that this team is going to have a foundation in the run game and then be able to pass out of it, whether it's play action, whatever, tight ends. And we saw a little bit of that in the spring game, but whether it's Jacob Bostic, great in-state prospect, but again, cut out of a similar cloth as Ian Pugh. So, does he want to split those reps? Is there room enough for both of them? I'm sure Illinois would say yes. Or a guy like a Sean Miller, who's a really well-rounded kind of Swiss Army knife type receiver, not necessarily a super explosive guy, but he's just really reliable, really technical, and has good athleticism overall. Or like Hollins. Hollins is a burner. And, if you're not going to get Bostic, then maybe you turn up the heat on Hollins and try to close that one out. So they've got options. It's not like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel for receiving options. These guys all have other P5 offers. They're all wanted by good schools. So, that's a different position to be in, where you're not just trying to find a sleeper. But if a guy like Hollins does show up that runs the speed he does, then, we've said it earlier in the pod, if you know what you want, go for it. So
yeah, Hollins is such an interesting one, and to be honest with you, Illinois wanted to keep that really quiet, and they did. I heard about the name late in the week, and heard he could be visiting, and then they offered him on the visit, and the story behind him is fascinating. A kid who grows up in rural Mississippi, works on his family farm, plays football too, and he's pretty dang good at it. But he doesn't play for a great team, plays for a small school, plays quarterback because he's the best athlete on the team, goes to an Alabama camp, doesn't get much interest out of it, gets a few numbers from coaches. But then he goes to another Alabama camp. His younger brother, drags him there. Ashton didn't really want to go, and George McDonald happens to be there. Ashton runs a 4.3 something, so a sub 4.40 at Alabama. So even if that's laser time 4.5, that's rare, especially when you're 6'4", 170 pounds. McDonald must have liked what he saw in position drills as well, liked his work ethic, got to know him and his family a little bit, and basically was calling him every day just to say, hey, get up here for an official visit, get up here for an official visit. And probably Ryan wanted to make sure nobody at their schools were sniffing around, and they get him up here, they get an offer, and Illinois is right in the front of that recruitment because nobody else is really in on him. And it's an intriguing story. I love the story. On his huddle film, right? It's hard to see much because he's a quarterback and he's obviously going to be a raw wide receiver, but if you're 6'4", 70 pounds and you run sub 4.5 and you're as quick as he shows on film, that's an intriguing high ceiling prospect. And Illinois has had a lot of high ceiling guys in that wide receiver room outside of, Josh and Matt Torbebe and maybe Brian Hightower. And now you add Isaiah Williams to it, but he's an intriguing prospect. Like I'd love to see him work out at wide receiver, but George McDonald, who's coached in the NFL and has coached really good wide receivers, really seems to like him.
Well, at that size and at that speed, those are both surefire D1 Power 5 athletic traits. Again, the question for me, and McDonald would have gotten to see him work out at the camp and see what he did as a receiver. But, if he can run like that and he can catch, like that's a mismatch problem. And that's a guy that you can send deep. And to your point, if he played quarterback all year, there's not going to be much receiver film out there, which between that, going to a small school and maybe just not doing a whole lot to market himself, he's got a lot on Huddle, but, if he's not doing a whole lot to really market himself and seek those offers out, then that's probably why he stayed under the radar for so long. So, kudos to them for seeing something they like and going full steam ahead with it. He is very interesting. I'd love to see more film of him catching the ball just to see, how reliable his hands are, how sharp his route running is, because it's tough to tell. One, it's just kind of tough to tell on some Huddle film, but two, it's tough to tell against that level of competition. He's played so much out of position. If he's able to focus on just playing receiver, really dig into that position, how much better can he get? But, the work ethic is obviously there, and I could see them resonating from a personality standpoint too. Same idea with Clayton Leonard. Yep. They love the farm kid, and he's just got that blue collar lunch pail, bring your lunch pail to work mentality. And the question again is going to be, is he willing to take that jump to go so far from home in unfamiliar territory? It'd be kind of, it'd be a new experience for him. But at the same time, Champaign's not downtown New York City. It's not like Georgia Tech where it'd be Atlanta. You're going to a town that, even though it has like a good college town vibe, is still surrounded by farmland. So, maybe he finds a home away from home there.
The guy I think is the most intriguing target, or maybe Illinois stands in the best spot with outside of Hollins, would be for me, Jared Beatty. We mentioned him, very close with Ian Pugh, knows Malachi Hood very well, has gotten to know Jordan Anderson very well the last couple months. And Illinois hosted him for an official visit on June 4th. He then went to Minnesota, Michigan State, and Tennessee for official visits. And the expectation is he'll make a decision here in the next couple weeks. And it does feel like Illinois is the leader. I haven't quite put in the crystal ball, though I've thought about it a lot here. Ryan, Michigan State just hosted him. I don't think Minnesota's, that big of a priority for him or for Minnesota. And Tennessee's just kind of an interesting fit. They seem like they would have, bigger targets out there, but that's one it feels like they sit pretty well. And for me, that's a huge need position with Owen Carney, Isaiah Gay graduating. Mark Mondesir is playing that position. They got Seth Coleman coming up. They recruited Dwayne Johnson. We'll see what Ezekiel Holmes can bring at that position, but this is a high need position. Not that Beatty would play as a true freshman, but they need more 6'5", 220 good pass rushers at that position. And Beatty's really the best in the state at that position. And he's got all these close friends. So it feels like Illinois is in a good spot there.
Yeah. And I've always liked where Illinois has been with him. I'm kind of where you are with it, where I'm not quite ready to call it for Illinois yet. Anything can happen on these visits. A guy could have a change of heart. But when I talked to him during the season, Illinois was the only official visit at that time that he knew he was going to take. So that tells me at least Illinois at that point, and I mean, that was in like late March, early April. I can't remember exactly when the game was, but, Bielema had only been on the job for a few months at that point. And for them to already make that kind of impression on an in-state guy, I think that stood out to me. Obviously, some other Big Ten programs came calling. He took the visit to Tennessee. Tennessee is an impressive campus. They have an impressive program with a lot of history. But it's always just felt like Illinois really put themselves out in front. And if they can hold those other programs off, that'll be another big win. And again, Hood, Beatty, Anderson, those guys are all tight. And so they know each other. They train together. They work out together. And I know those guys have been on him. If you look at any of his social media posts from when he goes on these visits, they'll post those pictures, and Hood and Anderson almost right away are like, nah, delete this, take this down. This isn't it. So they've been on him nonstop. And so I like where Illinois is. We'll see how this one shapes up as the decision is coming. I'm sure Malachi Hood would love to not be the only defensive commit in this class so far. So he would probably want some help. And that'd be a great addition there. And, from a scheme standpoint, if you look at what Ryan Walters did with Missouri the last few years, that position is crucial. And they've had a lot of good players at that rush linebacker, those outside linebacker spots. So, Beatty probably needs a little bit of time to put some weight on, but he's an exceptional athlete, awesome frame, doesn't carry a lot of bad weight. He's explosive. I think for him, the key is just putting on some good muscle so that he can be a little more physical at the line of scrimmage, shed those blocks, and get to the quarterback. But, the burst is there, the instinct is there. It's just a matter of him physically developing the rest of the way to be that impact player that they think he can be at that position.
We got a couple more in-state targets, and I have no doubt they've made in-state inroads, right? But now they have to win some of these bigger battles, and I think Pugh is one of those. I think Beatty certainly would be one of those, a Big Ten battle. But a couple more, and one would include Aiden Lawfrey, running back out of Gibson City, and Illinois has made him a priority for a while here. And I've always thought Iowa was going to be tough for Illinois to beat. And he also took a visit to Washington State, which was one of his first offers, and they run a wide open offense that could really intrigue somebody. But, Aiden's kept things pretty close to the vest. But after his Illinois official visit, I started to think Illinois might have the lead here. He even told me, like, the other schools are going to have to match this. Now, the key, Ryan, as you know, is holding on to that momentum, holding on to that feeling through the rest of the month and through the rest of these official visits. And now he's gone to Washington State and gave them high praise. And now he's gone to Iowa. And I know Illinois knows that, hey, Iowa's probably going to appeal to him. That's a really good program that has a great history of running backs, or if he wants to play safety or does play safety, they have a history of that. But this is where it becomes Illinois has a staff that's message is resonating, right? They have this new car smell that is really intriguing to a lot of players. But does that overcome the years of being irrelevant, really, in the Big Ten? And that's why Brett Bielema and his staff have done a really good job, but they have a tough job at Illinois to convince these prospects not to go to something stable, even though what happened last summer, like Iowa has rebounded from that apparently. And Iowa is a very great sell. They're always good. They have tradition, they have identity, and Illinois is just trying to be them, right? So that's going to be an interesting battle. And I know Illinois thinks Iowa's is going to be a challenge to overcome, but it feels like it's coming down to those two Big Ten schools. And if Illinois wins that one, man, that's a huge feather in Bielema's cap.
Yeah, and I think that we've always identified that as being the big challenge for overcoming in-state. They've gotten off to a good start, but the history of just where this program's been in the last several years, outside of a few bowl years, it's been mediocrity at best. And call a spade, they haven't been great, and that's why Bielema is now here. That's why they've made a handful of coaching changes in the last 10 to 15 years, is because while they've had occasional success, overall the program hasn't been where it needs to be, where it was in the 80s and then the late 90s and early 2000s. So, that perception of the program is one of the biggest obstacles to overcome. And then you combine that with what felt like an abandonment of in-state recruiting over the last 2 years. It's a tough turnaround to make in the near term. So, yeah, it would be a big win for Illinois. I mean, obviously Iowa has that consistency, that steadiness. Ferentz is there; he's still there. There have been rumors that he might start to plan out his exit plan, but he hasn't said anything. And until he does, it's safe to assume he's still going to be there. And Iowa has a good offense that's friendly both to running back and receiver. It's very balanced. And I kind of think that that's what Illinois' offense might end up looking like to some extent. It's more like Iowa than Wisconsin. We'll see what shakes out this fall. But when Aiden took that visit, Illinois really has been doing a great job with these visits. We talked about that before. And him making that comment almost makes me think that Iowa was like, all right, challenge accepted. We'll match you and beat you. So I don't think that Illinois from a depth chart standpoint is facing too much of an obstacle there. Chase Brown will probably be done in the next year or two. They've got Jordan Anderson and they got McCray.
Reggie Love.
And Reggie Love. But I mean, McCray and Anderson are big backs. Reggie Love's kind of that, first and second or the third down, maybe change of pace. He can kind of do it all, but he's not that battering ram back like some of those other guys. And I think Lawfrey just gives you so many options for what you can do with him just because he's such a great athlete. So I don't know that he's necessarily competing for, roster space in that regard, because I think he would have a pretty unique role himself. But it's just a matter of, one, he's had a front row seat to Illinois over the last pretty much his whole life. And in his whole lifetime, Illinois has had maybe 3 or 4 decent seasons, one good one. And he's probably seen Iowa have great years.
Really, in his memory, which is probably the last 8 years,
it ain't been good.
Right. It's really been what, 1 or 2 if you count back bowl year or good year. Like, so yeah. And I've always thought, like, does a kid that's 30 minutes away from Illinois, does he want to get away for school? Right. Mm-hmm. Like, and he kind of went against that when I asked him about it, but I think it's always a consideration. Might want to get away from home a little bit, away from the pressure. But there are some upsides of being close to home and being marketable close to home, especially with this NIL coming in as well. But I do think, Ryan, if there's one in-state target, if Illinois can only get one in-state target the rest of the way, I think it's pretty safe to say, no offense to any of these other guys who they really want, so don't take us out of context here if you're a parent or close to one of those recruits, but Austin Brown, the 4-star safety out of Johnston City. They just hosted him for an official visit. He was kind enough to talk to me for 10, 12 minutes the other day, breaking down everything about his recruitment. So check that out on the site. But Illinois is in the mix here, man, and they have made him a top priority. I think they've done a really, really good job of both selling him on staying close to home to his mother. It's only a 2.5, 3 hour drive, and being a big part of their turnaround and likely being an immediate impact guy for them in a new defense where Ryan Walters, the defensive coordinator, is basically going to build a defense kind of around his skill set, which is very, very versatile. Of course, they're going up against a lot of great programs here. Northwestern come on, what have they done at DB here recently? Greg Newsome, who we both covered his recruitment, first rounder. Brandon Joseph is an All-American, and that program sells itself right now, both academically and on the field, winning 2 out of the last 3 Big Ten West championships. Wisconsin, Jim Leonard, man, like everyone wants him, including the Packers. Some schools have talked about him as potential head coaching candidate. I don't know if Illinois was incredibly interested. I don't know about that, but like he was rumored to be kind of attached to the Illinois job. And, he's a former safety, former 3-time All-American, former NFL safety. So Wisconsin is the epitome of sustained success that Illinois is trying to get to. Then Michigan, even though they got, I don't know how much leeway they have up there, but it's Michigan, it's prestigious, and Boston College has done a really good job. Like I don't know if they're going to land him. I would put them probably towards the bottom of the list here, but they've done a really good job recruiting him. They're a new staff there for the most part, and Hafley's got a good history dating back to his Ohio State days. So that's gonna be really tough for them. But he took one visit the first day. Unofficial. He took official on the first day of June. Then the last day of June that he can make a visit, he goes to Illinois as well. So it feels like he's really interested. Now it's about, can they overcome all that other stuff and all these other great programs to land one of the top prospects in the state.
Yeah, and he's interesting because when one of the top prospects in the state is from Southern Illinois, you've got the Luke Ford pitch in your back pocket, right? So, I mean, he could go to a school like a Michigan and just be one of many. Or, as Ryan Walters is selling him right now, you could come in and we'll build this around you. It may not be right away, but we'll start building this around you. And, I think Brown's so multi-talented and he fits in so many different roles, but he really seems like the kind of guy who could be that quarterback at the defense, really call out the plays, a great athlete, probably more of a strong safety than a free safety, but I mean, he's got the ability to play just about anywhere back there. It's one of those where you just throw your cell out there and press until he makes his decision and see what happens. I mean, being up against Michigan is tough. Michigan obviously has a lot to sell, although I think you've got to wonder what's going on up there. Harbaugh has been on a little bit of tenuous ground. They just reworked his deal, but it's definitely not as favorable. The one that does intrigue me a bit is Boston College, because I think he has a good relationship with Jeff Hafley, and they've done a great job recruiting there. Boston College has always kind of had a presence in the Chicago area, or in the state of Illinois, mostly in the Chicago area. But, obviously it's resonated enough with him to take an official visit out there despite a lot of his other options. Wisconsin's Wisconsin, good defense. Northwestern is going to be interesting to me because Northwestern did just land a commitment from Trayvon Howard from IMG, and I think those two guys would play similar positions. So, I haven't looked at what Northwestern's current depth chart situation looks like, but I would have to think that would play a role in his decision, or at least influence it to a degree. So that commitment might help Illinois, at least give them a leg up when you're comparing apples to apples to Northwestern. But, with that opportunity to build that, and the fact that these in-state commits have been all over Brown lately. So, for example, Pugh and Hood and Anderson all went down to Champaign on Saturday to hang out with him while he was in town. So, they're pressing on him. They're trying to get him. And if they're able to close that deal, man, that's a big, big get and a cornerstone that you can build around in that defensive backfield.
Yeah, that would be the shockwave, right? Like UN Beatty, that's a really good get. People are like, oh, Illinois starting to make some noise. Like Brown would be a shockwave. You beat Wisconsin, Iowa was trying to get him too and didn't even get him for an official. He went for an unofficial there, but if you're able to land him over all those schools, that would be the eyebrow raiser of all of them. Of course, they're shooting their shot for a lot of guys. Ryan, some of these offensive tackles, they have a wide net trying to get that last offensive tackle. They're going hard after Ryan Baer, and they're not. No, Brett Bielema was not hiding it very much on social media with his Bear gifts. And Patrick Kudus, they're going after. Some defensive linemen, Sayla Brown and Felix Hickson are pretty highly ranked prospects. Cody Jones, a 4-star Michigan commit. They hosted him for an official visit. And you talked with Jaden Mangum as well, who's a 4-star athlete that's likely to play safety for them if they were able to land him. So they're shooting their shot for a lot of those guys. Mike O'Reilly Ducker, I don't expect them to land him, but top 400 tight end. They would love to add a third tight end if they could in this class. So any of those guys stand out to you most as they shoot their shot for some pretty highly ranked prospects?
Well, I really am interested to see what shakes out with Ryan Baer, because it seems like there's a lot of programs that feel pretty good about where they're at with him. Whether it's Kentucky, Virginia, Illinois, And then, it was after the Michigan State visit that he decided to call off his Notre Dame visit. And that really, to me, was the most interesting thing, was he called off that Notre Dame visit. There's been some tweets from his dad that dropped some hints on Illinois, and it sounds like Illinois, took some measures with his visits that maybe, or with his visit to Champaign, that other programs didn't, that made it feel more inclusive for him as far as like family and other visitors. But we'll see how it shakes out. I mean, I've always,
I can tell you,
I watched.
Illinois felt good after that visit, and they've
Oh
gotten
yeah.
good feedback. After he started to be like, oh, he's not going to Notre Dame. This recruitment feels like it's close to being done. Some people don't think he's quite ready to make that decision because everybody is getting good feedback. It's not just Illinois that's getting good feedback. So that'll be very interesting. But that would be another big eyebrow raiser if they can land a 6'7", 320-pound jacked. Like there's not a lot of bad weight on Ryan Baer. That would be a heck of a get.
Well, that's the type of offensive lineman that's made Brett Bielema successful in the past. So that to me is the sell, the family aspect of it all. But with him, he had a lot of really good interest, but you got him on campus, you nailed the visit. It's just a matter of, can you beat out these other programs that also have good sells and bring in a guy that could be an anchor on that offensive line. I mean, you pair him up with Whitenack, Okla, those guys. I mean, shoot, that's a good offensive line class right there. That's really good. And Kudus also great. I think, the chances probably went down a little bit with him whenever Dallin Hayden did decide to go ahead and go with Ohio State. And then there's also, Matt Freese is in the picture too. But, to me right now, Ryan Baer is probably that top guy. And if you can get a guy like that, you can behind him, and then you can run Jordan Anderson. I mean, you're just going to wear defenses down with a line and some running backs like that. Like that's just, it's that power football that we've come to know under Brett Bielema.
Yeah, it's a little too early to grade just how June went yet, right? Because of all these guys, whether it's Bear or Brown or Beatty and Bostic and all these guys, Miller, like they all have visits or all have commitment dates coming up very shortly. And then you have to keep those guys, even if they do commit. So it's a little too early, but if they get a couple of the guys we're talking about, that shows that Illinois is heading on the right track, but they just got to finish. They got to close off some of these recruitments. But if they're able to get a couple of those guys, Ryan, you start to see like, hey, if you're ranked 8th or 7th or 9th in the Big Ten recruiting rankings, that's a huge improvement for Illinois. And you start beating some of these fellow Big Ten West programs. That's a huge improvement. And a lot will depend on evaluation, just like Northwestern and Wisconsin don't always have highly ranked classes, but they evaluate, they develop well. And of course, that's what Bielema did at Wisconsin.
Yeah. And the other thing too, is going to be putting these guys that they get in position to win on the field, which we won't see until the fall. And the other thing too is, you start getting classes in that 7th, 8th, 9th range in the Big Ten. That's just one class. It's going to take time and consistency in stacking these classes year after year for that change to really move the program. I think it's going to take 3 to 4 classes to really see classes at least consistently ranked in that range, if not better, to start to move the needle. It's not going to just turn around overnight because they're freshmen. They're going to be freshmen. If you land a couple impact transfers, that can change things a little bit, but most of those guys are freshmen. It's going to take time for them, 1, to physically develop, and 2, to earn the playing time and get up to speed to be able to really make an impact on the field. But you got to start somewhere, and this is the best place to do it. And if you can lay that foundation with this first class and continue to build upon it, then 2 to 3 years down the road, you're looking at being reliably in a bowl game. You've got much better public perception, which also helps with recruiting, so it kind of compounds on itself. So I think they're off to a good start. I think they've done a good job of building momentum, getting excitement in the fan base, and really just appealing to these guys. It's just a matter of now you got to hang on to them for signing day. You got to get them inked, and we saw this mad rush to get visits in, and now I'm curious to see how many of these guys maybe feel that they rushed into a decision, not necessarily Illinois commits, but just in general nationally. If these guys, they rushed into all these visits and then they're like, whoa, I need to take a minute, or if they end up holding. I think the camaraderie that the Illinois class has among itself so far is going to be really big in retaining those commitments come signing day. But I'll just be kind of curious to see what the turnover rate is. I mean, the transfer portal's been crazy. Is it going to be something similar with the commits this year? I don't know. But I feel pretty good about where Illinois is, and I feel like these guys have built a good bond so far that's going to keep at least a majority of this class together.
Great stuff, Ryan Easterling. Follow him on Twitter at Ryan Easterling. Ryan, appreciate it, man.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy.